Welcome to the One in the Many. My name is Arshak Benlian. My purpose with the One in the Many podcast is to explore the process of integration as developmentally formative and therapeutically corrective factor in human psychology. The One in the Many is the study of how conscious life differentiates identity, integrates relation, regulates itself under constraint, and sustains direction through time. Subscribe to the One in the Many podcast and connect with me by writing to abenlian@oneinthemany.net. Every great advance in human civilization has begun with an act of observation. Before there is philosophy, science, mathematics, psychology, commerce, or law, there is the simple yet extraordinary capacity to attend to reality. Observation is the first expression of consciousness in action. It is the moment at which existence presents itself to awareness and invites understanding. Yet observation alone has never been sufficient to produce knowledge. Human beings have observed the heavens for tens of thousands of years before astronomy emerged as a science. They watched rivers flow long before they understood hydraulics. They experienced emotions, dreams, aspirations, and suffering long before psychology became an academic discipline. Observation introduces man to reality, but it does not yet explain reality. The transformation of observation into knowledge requires another process entirely. That process is integration. Every observation begins as a particular. It is a singular event situated within a specific context. Knowledge emerges only when individual observations are related to one another through a common structure. The mind discovers that what first appeared unique is in fact an instance of a more general principle. A child who struggles to maintain balance while taking his first steps eventually discovers the same relationship while riding a bicycle. Years later, he recognizes balance in conversation, in business, in engineering, in music, and in leadership. Their circumstances continually change, yet the form remains recognizable. Integration is the activity by which consciousness discovers that permanence within variation. It is the movement from isolated experiences toward coherent understanding. This movement defines the history of every science. Human progress has never consisted merely in accumulating observations. Every civilization has possessed observations. Progress begins when observations become organized into principles, and principles become capable of generating new observations. The scientist, the philosopher, the artist, and the entrepreneur each participate in the same fundamental process. They discover relationships that were previously unseen, integrate them into a larger conceptual order, and thereby reveal possibilities that could not have been imagined from the original observations alone. Civilization advances because understanding acquires the power to reproduce. The measure of science, therefore, is not a quantity of facts it has accumulated, but the quality of the relationships it has discovered. Every mature science eventually becomes a science of measurement. This does not mean that every science imitates mathematics. It means that every science ultimately identifies the fundamental process operating within its own domain and develops a method by which that process can be understood, compared, predicted, and refined. Physics matured when motion, force, and energy became measurable. Chemistry matured when matter became intelligible through the organization of atoms and molecules. Biology matured when living systems could be understood through the cell and the mechanism of inheritance. In every instance, measurement followed a prior discovery. Before one can measure anything, one must first know what it is that ought to be measured. This sequence explains why mathematics occupies such a remarkable position in the history of knowledge. Mathematics did not become the language of science because numbers possess mystical authority. It became indispensable because it continually expanded humanity's capacity to measure relationships that had previously escaped representation. Arithmetic first measured quantity. Geometry measured spatial form. Calculus measured continuous change. Probability measured uncertainty. Information theory measured communication. Each expansion of mathematics corresponded to an expansion in humanity's ability to perceive order where previously there had been only complexity. Among these developments, few are more philosophically revealing than the emergence of complex numbers. Their history is often presented as the solution to a technical algebraic problem. Equations involving the square root of negative numbers resisted solution within the real number system, leading mathematicians to introduce what eventually became known as the imaginary unit. While historically accurate, this account tells only part of the story. It explains why complex numbers were introduced, but not why they became indispensable. Their enduring significance lies not in solving difficult equations, but in expanding the very nature of mathematical measurement. Real numbers describe realized quantity. They tell us how much, how far, how heavy, or how long. They measure actual displacement along a line. Yet nature is not composed exclusively of linear relationships. The world is equally characterized by cycles, oscillations, rotations, rhythms, and recurring transformations. A compass needle does not simply occupy a position. It possesses orientation. An alternating electrical current does not merely possess magnitude, it possesses phase. A wave is defined not only by its amplitude, but by its place within an ongoing cycle. Linear arithmetic alone cannot fully represent these relationships because they unfold within a field of continual rotation rather than simple displacement. Here, the interpretation advanced by Ron Pisaturo offers an illuminating philosophical insight. The traditional designation of the second axis as imaginary in quotation marks encourages the mistaken impression that it represents something less real than the ordinary number line. Pisaturo argues that a more descriptive understanding is to regard this orthogonal dimension as representing potential. The real axis measures realized movement through arithmetic. The second axis measures the potential of movement expressed through orientation, oscillation, and rotation. These are not two separate realities, but two complementary dimensions of the same reality. One measures where a system potentially exists. The other measures how it is capable of becoming something else. The history of complex numbers, therefore, teaches a lesson that reaches far beyond mathematics. Their significance lies not merely in their computational utility, but in the recognition that reality sometimes contains relationships for which existing systems of measurements are insufficient. The limitation was never reality itself. The limitation was the dimensionality through which reality was being observed. Once mathematics expanded its framework, relationships that had appeared contradictory became perfectly coherent. More importantly, entirely new classes of phenomena became measurable. Alternating current, wave mechanics, signal processing, electromagnetism, and quantum theory all depend upon this expanded conception of number. Mathematics did not abandon arithmetic. It completed it by adding another dimension through which reality could be represented. The history of every mature science follows this same pattern. Progress occurs not because reality changes, but because the observer discovers a more adequate meaning of measuring it. Every major scientific revolution has enlarged humanity's capacity to perceive order where previously there had appeared only complexity. Newton did not change the motion of the planets. He revealed the mathematical relationships governing their motion. Maxwell did not create electromagnetism. He demonstrated the unity underlying electrical and magnetic phenomena. Information theory did not invent communication. It identified the measurable structure through which communication occurs. The expansion of knowledge has always been an expansion of measurement, and every expansion of measurement has followed the discovery of a previously hidden dimension of relationship. Psychology presents a striking contrast. Few sciences possess such extraordinary observational richness. Human beings have reflected upon consciousness since the dawn of civilization. Every culture has observed love, fear, ambition, grief, courage, jealousy, imagination, memory, aspiration, despair, and joy. The philosopher has examined reason. The poet has explored emotion. The theologian has investigated conscience. The physician has studied behavior. The neuroscientist has mapped the brain. Never has a science accumulated such an abundance of observations concerning its subject while remaining so deeply divided concerning its organizing principles. This fragmentation is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of developmental incompleteness. A science frequently accumulates observations long before it discovers the unit capable of integrating them. Ancient astronomers recorded planetary motions with astonishing precision centuries before Newton explained gravitation. Chemists cataloged substances long before the atomic theory unified their observations. Biology described living organisms long before the cell became the organizing principle of life. Observation necessarily precedes integration. The abundance of psychological knowledge may therefore indicate not maturity of the discipline, but its readiness for a higher order of organization. The central question becomes remarkably simple. What exactly is psychology attempting to measure? Behavior is measurable. Neuroactivity is measurable. Memory performance, reaction time, emotional expression, personality traits, and cognitive ability can all be measured with increasing sophistication. Yet these measurements remain largely independent of one another. They resemble arithmetic before geometry. Each quantity possesses meaning in isolation, but the relationships among them remain incompletely understood. Psychology has become increasingly successful at measuring the realized manifestations of consciousness while possessing no universally accepted framework for measuring the organization of consciousness itself. This distinction may prove decisive. There is a profound difference between measuring what consciousness produces and measuring how consciousness organizes itself before those productions emerge. A person's decisions cannot be understood solely by observing completed actions any more than the future position of a compass needle can be understood without considering its orientation. Human existence continually unfolds between actuality and potentiality. Every decision begins as an unrealized possibility before becoming an observable event. Every achievement exists first as purpose. Every creation exists first as conception. Every civilization exists first as an integration within a single mind before becoming embodied in institutions, technologies, works of art, or systems of law. The missing dimension of psychology may therefore be neither another faculty nor another category of behavior. It may be the dimension through which consciousness orients itself toward reality. This is the dimension in which attention is allocated, values are organized, purposes are selected, contradictions are resolved, and possibilities are transformed into actions. It is not separate from cognition or emotion. It is the process through which cognition and emotion become coordinated within a coherent direction of life. Here, the concept of integration acquires a fundamentally different meaning from its ordinary psychological usage. Integration is not simply the combination of separate parts into a larger whole. It is the continuous organization of consciousness toward progressively greater coherence with reality. It is the process by which observation becomes conception, conception becomes value, value becomes purpose, purpose becomes action, and action becomes character. Integration is the dynamic through which potential becomes actuality without ceasing to generate new potential. The theory of the one in the many proposes that this process constitutes the proper unit perspective of psychology. The psychological nature of man is not exhausted by thought, emotion, behavior, or neuroactivity considered separately. It consists in the uniquely human capacity to volitionally organize these processes into an integrated relationship with existence. Volition occupies a distinctive place within this framework because it is the capacity through which orientation itself becomes subject to deliberate revision. Through volition, the individual is able to redirect attention, reorganize values, reconsider premises, and alter the trajectory of future development. Consciousness does not merely observe reality, it progressively reorganizes itself in response to reality. Seen from this perspective, integration, misintegration, and disintegration are not static conditions but orientations within the field of human development. They resemble the orientations represented by the complex plane more closely than the linear oppositions typically employed in psychological classification. Integration describes increasing coherence between perception, conception, value, and action. Misintegration describes organization that remains internally active yet progressively contradictory. Disintegration describes the dissolution of coherent organization. The movement among these orientations is neither random nor arbitrary. It reflects the continual interaction between consciousness and existence mediated by volition. If this perspective is correct, then the purpose of psychology changes in a fundamental way. The discipline is no longer concerned primarily with cataloging mental states, classifying disorders, or describing patterns of behavior. Those remain indispensable observations, just as arithmetic remains indispensable within mathematics. They are not discarded. They are situated within a broader framework. The central task becomes understanding the process by which consciousness continuously organizes through time. Psychology becomes, in its deepest sense, the science of human integration. This distinction immediately clarifies a problem that has accompanied psychology since its emergence as an independent discipline. Most psychological classifications describe outcomes: anxiety, depression, confidence, resilience, impulsivity, narcissism, flourishing, trauma, and fulfillment. All describe conditions that have already manifested themselves within experience. They tell us something important about the present state of an individual, yet they tell us comparatively little about the process that generated that state. The diagnosis describes the visible expression of an organization already achieved. It does not necessarily reveal the organization itself. The difference is analogous to the distinction between observing the position of a compass needle and understanding the magnetic field within which it moves. The position is real. It can be measured directly. Yet its meaning depends entirely upon an unseen field that gives rise to that position. To understand the field is not to deny the position, it is to explain it. Human consciousness exhibits a similar structure. Every thought, every emotion, value judgment, every decision, every action represents the visible expression of an underlying organization. That organization is neither mystical nor inaccessible. It is revealed through the continual relationship between observation, identification, integration, and reduction. Human beings do not merely accumulate experiences, they organize experiences into increasingly comprehensive structures capable of guiding future perception and action. The quality of that organization determines the quality of life that emerges from it. Integration, therefore, possesses degrees rather than merely existence. Just as energy exhibits varying intensities and temperature exhibits varying magnitudes, integration manifests varying densities. A person may demonstrate remarkable integration within one domain while remaining profoundly misintegrated within another. An accomplished scientist may possess extraordinary conceptual coherence while struggling to sustain intimate relationships. An exceptional entrepreneur may organize commercial activity brilliantly while remaining ethically conflicted. Likewise, a parent may exhibit profound wisdom in family life while possessing little understanding of political or economic systems. Integration is always contextual, yet the process by which integration occurs remains universal. This observation introduces an important distinction between integration itself and the content being integrated. Different individuals acquire different knowledge, skills, experiences, and values. The contents of consciousness necessarily vary. The process by which consciousness organizes those contents remains fundamentally the same. The child learning to walk, the engineer designing a bridge, the musician composing a symphony, and the philosopher developing a theory all participate in the same recursive movement. Observation gives rise to identification. Identification seeks integration. Integration undergoes reduction through continual validation against reality. Successful reduction preserves integrity, and integrity liberates attention for further exploration. The cycle repeats at progressively higher levels of complexity. The significance of this recursive process extends beyond individual psychology because every enduring human achievement originates within it. Before there is a scientific discovery, there is an observation. Before there is a legal principle, there is a judgment concerning justice. Before there is a technological invention, there is an integration of previously unrelated ideas. Before there is a work of art, there is the recognition of a form that seeks expression. Civilization emerges from countless acts of successful integration performed by individuals across generations. This realization transforms our understanding of history. Civilizations are not built primarily by armies, governments, economies, or technologies. These are the visible consequences of something more fundamental. Every institution represents an integration that has become sufficiently stable to preserve itself across time. Every scientific discipline preserves integrations that survived repeated reduction against reality. Every legal system preserves integrations concerning justice, responsibility, and social cooperation. Every market preserves integrations concerning production, exchange, and value creation. Every language preserves integrations through which one consciousness communicates with another. Civilization is therefore the accumulated memory of successful integrations made durable through culture. The proliferation of civilization follows a remarkably consistent pattern. An individual discovers a new relationship. That discovery is articulated as a principle. The principle becomes teachable. Once transmitted, it becomes reproducible within other minds. As increasing numbers of individuals incorporate the same integration into their own thinking, the principle becomes embodied within institutions, technologies, customs, and traditions. The integration no longer depends upon its original discoverer. It acquires objective existence within civilization. This explains why periods of extraordinary cultural flourishing often appear to produce simultaneous advances across seemingly unrelated domains. Ancient Greece generated philosophy, mathematics, political theory, architecture, and dramatic literature within the same historical moment because the civilization was undergoing a common expansion in its capacity for rational integration. The Renaissance witnessed parallel advances in art, engineering, anatomy, navigation, finance, and scientific observation because a deeper transformation of consciousness was expressing itself through many different forms. The Industrial Revolution, the development of constitutional government, the maturation of classical physics, and the rise of modern commerce were not isolated historical accidents. They were mutually reinforcing manifestation of increasing integrative capacity. The same principle applies to the individual. Human flourishing does not consist merely in possessing greater knowledge. It consists in increasing one's capacity to integrate knowledge across contexts. Wisdom differs from information precisely because wisdom recognizes relationships that information alone cannot reveal. The integrated individual begins to perceive the same organizing principles operating within family, commerce, science, philosophy, art, education, and leadership. What once appeared as separate domains gradually reveals as multiple expressions of a common process. The purpose of education, therefore, is not merely the transmission of information, it is the cultivation of integrative capacity. The purpose of philosophy is not merely speculation, it is the organization of knowledge into principles capable of guiding life. The purpose of psychology is not merely the treatment of pathology. It is the understanding and refinement of the process through which consciousness continually transforms potential into actuality. If this understanding persists, then the future development of psychology will not depend primarily upon accumulating additional observations. It will depend upon identifying increasingly precise methods for measuring the organization of consciousness. Just as the complex plane extended mathematics by representing orientation together with quantity, a mature science of integration may extend psychology by representing orientation together with behavior, cognition, emotion, and value. The observable manifestations of consciousness will remain indispensable, but they will be understood as expressions of a deeper process whose organization becomes the true object of scientific investigation. The history of knowledge reveals a remarkably consistent pattern. Humanity does not advance because reality changes, but because its capacity to recognize the order already present within reality continually expands. Every great scientific revolution has begun with the discovery of a deeper principle of organization. The principle itself always existed. What changed was the observer's ability to perceive it, integrate it, and ultimately measure it. Science progresses not by inventing reality, but by discovering new dimensions through which reality becomes intelligible. Complex numbers illustrate this process with exceptional clarity. Their introduction did not replace arithmetic or diminish the validity of the real numbers. On the contrary, they preserved everything arithmetic had already achieved while extending its reach into phenomena that linear measurement alone could not adequately represent. The measurement of orientation, oscillation, rotation, and phase did not create these aspects of reality. It simply provided the conceptual instrument through which they could be understood. What had once appeared imaginary became indispensable, not because reality had changed, but because mathematics had become sufficiently comprehensive to represent a deeper order. Psychology may now stand before an analogous opportunity. It has spent more than a century refining its capacity to observe, classify, and measure the realized expressions of conscious life. It has accumulated extraordinary knowledge concerning perception, emotion, cognition, memory, learning, motivation, personality, and behavior. Yet these observations remain largely descriptive because the field has not reached consensus regarding the process that unites them. The challenge is therefore no longer one of observation, but of organization. The question is not whether consciousness exists, but what principle governs its development. If the defining characteristic of human existence is volitionally directed consciousness, then psychology's proper subject is neither thought nor emotion, considered independently. Its proper subject is the continual organization of consciousness through integration. Human life unfolds as a recursive movement from observation to identification, from identification to integration, from integration to reduction, and from reduction to renewed observation. Every successful cycle increases coherence, expands competence, and liberates attention for further exploration. Every failure of the cycle gives rise to misintegration or disintegration. The human condition is therefore neither static nor predetermined. It is developmental. It is directional. Above all, it is measurable because orientation itself possesses degrees of coherence, stability, and integrity. The significance of this insight extends beyond psychology because the same process governs civilization. Every scientific discovery, every philosophical principle, every technological innovation, every work of art, every legal institution, and every enduring cultural achievement begins as an integration within an individual consciousness. Once communicated, that integration becomes reproducible. Once reproduced, it becomes institutionalized. Civilization is thus the preservation of successful integrations across generations. It is humanity's collective memory organized into durable forms. The history of civilization is nothing less than the history of consciousness making its integrations permanent. This perspective also transforms our understanding of potential. Potential is often misunderstood as something unreal, something that exists only in imagination until it becomes actual. Yet the history of mathematics teaches otherwise. The second axis of the complex plane does not represent unreality. It represents a dimension of relationship without which many of the most fundamental processes in nature cannot be understood. Orientation is every bit as real as position. Oscillation is every bit as real as displacement. Rotation is every bit as real as translation. Potential, properly understood, is not the opposite of actuality. It is the field within which actuality continually emerges. The same is true of human life. A person's future is not unreal simply because it has not yet been realized. Purpose exerts causal influence before achievement exists. Values organize perception before behavior appears. Understanding reorganizes action long before institutions reflect that transformation. The orientation of consciousness toward reality is therefore as real as the actions through which that orientation ultimately manifests itself. Human development unfolds continuously between potential and actuality, and it is precisely this movement that a mature psychology must learn to understand. The contribution proposed by the theory of the one in the many is therefore not another taxonomy of mental states, nor another interpretation of personality, nor another therapeutic technique. Its ambition is more fundamental. It proposes that integration is the primary process through which conscious life organizes itself, and that this process constitutes the proper unit perspective of psychology. Integration, misintegration, and disintegration describe orientations within the field of human development, much as the complex plane describes orientations within the field of mathematical transformation. The objective is not to replace existing psychological knowledge, but to provide a dimension through which that knowledge becomes systematically related and ultimately measurable. Should this perspective prove fruitful, psychology may eventually undergo the same transformation that mathematics experienced with the development of complex numbers. It will not abandon its previous achievements. It will preserve them within a broader conceptual architecture. Observable behavior will remain real. Emotions will remain real. Cognition, memory, learning, identity, and personality will remain real. Yet each will be understood as the expression of a deeper process through which consciousness continually organizes its relationship with existence. The enduring lesson of civilization is that every expansion of human freedom, prosperity, creativity, and wisdom has followed an expansion in humanity's capacity to integrate reality. Every generation inherits the accumulated integrations of those who came before while bearing the responsibility of extending them further. The future of psychology, like the future of every science, will depend not merely upon observing more, but upon seeing more deeply. For the greatest discoveries are seldom new realities waiting to be invented. They are deeper dimensions of the same reality, patiently awaiting recognition by a consciousness prepared to integrate them. This is the one in the many. The principle of life is the process of integration from a single cell to an ideal human being. The story of life unfolds through integration, from a single percept to a library of knowledge. Through virtue, reason, honesty, independence, selfishness, productivity, you set your values, purpose, to achieve self-esteem and happiness. Through time and energy, from induction to integration to reduction, the smallest particle unifies matter, and the highest purpose unifies your life. You, the one in the many, matter. May you integrate your life with value-driven days.